Hey folks, welcome back. It's a big barn build. The roof is finished and I want to share with you all the stuff that went into that, including some of your questions from the last video. Stick around and let's make a start. Well, good morning, welcome back to the big barn build. And it's looking a bit more barn-like now. We've got a roof on and one step closer to being a bit weatherproof and ready for winter. I know it's only summer, but Joe is up on the roof. He's putting down the final fixings. That's Joe the roofer, not Joe the wife. He's getting all the remaining main fixings in and then gonna start on all the stitches. But the next thing we'll want to detail is the ridge. As you saw yesterday, when the ridge liner goes in before any sheets go on, that kind of seals the underside, but above there's a bit of a hollow because the end of these sheets butt up. Well, sorry, they don't butt up. You end up with a V because they're not mitered. Typically, you just gun in expanding foam there. These are 150mm deep and that valley is quite wide. So what I've decided to do is rip down some sheets of PIR to 100 by 100 kind of long sausages. And rightly or wrongly, that is the decision I've made. So we're going to gun in a bed of expanding foam at the bottom just to make sure all the nooks and crannies are sealed against the roof sheets. And then we're just going to sit that in there and then an additional bit of gun grade foam either side of that to lock it all in place. Otherwise, we'd be using 20 cans plus. Right, I've finished insulating that ridge now. I'll give you a quick look at that before the cap goes on. I think that was well worth doing because basically means we've now got 150mm insulation all the way over, and most of it is actually PIR board rather than expanding foam, where you end up with voids and you can't really control how insulating that is. I don't even know, the U value of expanding foam is probably inferior as well to the rest of this roof. Anyway, that's on. The guys are doing the stitches now. There's a lot of stitches. They're every 400 or 450 all the way up the roof, all the way along. So actually you use just as many of those as you do in the main fixings. There are now an awful lot of caps to put on because I made that decision to go with standard fixings rather than the molded head. So I'm going to make a start on that. And just like that, the roof is done. It was a complete 2-day transformation really, to go from no roof to having the whole thing done, fixed, trim on and all complete. As part of the last video, there were a bunch of questions that came through. I'll try and answer some of those now, but as you can see, the ridge is on. I didn't really film everything because I was doing the stitches whilst the guys were getting all the trim on, but they're fixed in on every ridge along there with the joints done. They finish at the end. They're a little bit long at the end, so I can get the barge boards on and that barge trim on in the future, because we're going to do it slightly more domestic looking than your conventional sort of commercial building where you might have just a metal trim and then metal walls below and that sort of thing. Same with the guttering. We're going to try and use a more of a domestic looking gutter rather than just the normal box guttering. But there were a bunch of questions on the last video, so first up, let's talk about the fixings. So apologies about the wind, not the easiest filming up here. So the fixings, I did go for standard fixings with loose caps in the end. I just wasn't happy with the molded head fixings on a black roof. I can see the appeal of them and I have used them in the past, but on the black I just think it would have shown up, maybe not so much up the top, but a lot of our landscaping and the driveway and things like that, you're not really that far off looking at the roof, and some of it is actually at eye level. So when you're looking at these fixings, you would likely have seen that shiny silver washer and the grey butyl under it. Now, these are pretty stubborn, and I'll get one off, but that's the standard fixing, as you can see. And obviously with these ones you can make sure that your butyl washer, is it butyl? I think it's butyl, is nicely compressed, and then this goes on. I'd also suggest that those go down so snug, they probably do offer a bit more weather resistance too. Maybe not from water, but certainly UV. After several years the UV would be hitting that rubber washer directly, and you know, UV is pretty severe. So maybe those plastic caps will give these a bit more of a shelf life. So the most sort of contentious issue with this style of roofing online is how you fix it, because everyone's got an opinion, and it would seem that every country has its own way of doing things. Here in the UK, the common practice, as far as I can see, is to fix your sheets through the pan, the trough sections, and then stitches obviously on the ridge where they lap over each other. A lot of people will argue that everything should be in the ridge because there's less chance of water being on there running down. Even though it is on there, it will shed either side. So I can see the argument for that. The manufacturer detailed for warranty and all that sort of stuff is to go through the pan. Now I wonder if that's more a legacy of when you use box profile sheets with no insulation, because in that situation, if you were fixing through the ridge, you might not get a nice tight you know, pulling force to secure it down to the purlins, and you might crush the profile slightly, whereas you wouldn't do that with these big sheets. At the top of the ridge, they're 180mm thick, they're very, very rigid. So I'm not quite sure if it would be so much of an issue with the insulated sheets, and I know some people do go through the ridge, but you know, at the end of the day, I was just following guidelines. That's what I expect to the roofers, and that's what was done, and I'm not going to lose sleep over it. Unfortunately, there's no way of secret fixing this style of roof. There are other Kingspan products that you can, but unfortunately we weren't permitted to use some of the other profiles in our planning. We had to use a corrugated or box profile. The other option for us, which didn't really work out, but would have been good, is I found a wave profile, which is essentially like a Big 6 corrugated, which would be almost like what we took off, like the asbestos fibre cement type. So you have 6 undulations per sheet, and that would have looked quite nice, and I think it would have suited the building. Unfortunately, they're only produced 80mm thick, and we would have had to do quite a lot of extensive work underneath to insulate to get it to the value we wanted. So the benefit of going with these ones at 150mm thick, they almost hit the U value we need. And actually, because our U values elsewhere in the build are so good, we could leave the roof as it is. Building regs are happy with it as it is, but I think just for belts and braces, when we do get our kind of sub ceiling underneath, even though we're doing a vaulted ceiling, we'll probably add a little bit more insulation there. A little bit of sound deadening maybe, although you can't really hear the rain through 150mm, and even if you had the most sound deadened roof, as soon as you put a Velux window in it, you're going to hear the rain on that anyway, so not so much of an issue. Right, any other questions that came up? One, solar panels. Yes, of course, we've got solar panels going on, just not quite there yet, and haven't got a supplier kind of booked in, although we've had a couple of quotes, or 3 quotes now. We've got, I think, approximately 40 panels on the planning permission design, So we're anywhere around that is what we're aiming for. A lot of it on the east side and a smaller section of 15 panels on the west side. It's a nice elevation in the, well, a nice pitch of roof, so it's quite good for solar. Either way, all of that is in hand. I'm not sure we're going to be able to tie it in whilst the scaffolding's up, unfortunately. I don't want, even though the scaffolding is still here, just because the scaffolders haven't turned up yet, I don't want to rush that decision, and also I don't really want to earmark loads of our budget for solar when we haven't quite worked out how we're going to pay for the floor or the kitchen yet. But it is going to happen, and don't worry, this roof will be full of solar at some point. Other questions were about the roof itself, why we went this route. Obviously, being a barn and a modern barn at that, we had to go for a corrugated or a box profile type roof as part of our planning design, and this is what we went for. Like I said earlier, box profile is the only one that comes thick enough if we're going to achieve everything in a one panel unit. So 150mm thick trapezoidal panel, quad core is what Kingspan call theirs, is just the most cost effective way to go as well. It's less than £100 a square metre, and that's to fully insulate and fully finish and cover the roof and trims. So I can't think of any other way that we could do it, and this way we were done in 2 days. No cutting and fitting insulation between rafters and purlins, which is probably the most soul destroying job ever. No kind of wool insulation, no blown insulation. The other option we could have done, which I would have quite liked to do, is to continue that cellulose or wood fibre insulation we're using in the walls up and over. The issue there is the weight. So these panels are no more than 17 kilo a square metre, which is pretty light considering, and it's not actually much heavier. And in actual fact, it might be the same as a solid asbestos sheet or a fibre cement sheet. And that's insulation and the roof covering. If we were to use a cassette system or an I-beam or something like that, and then put insulation inside there, we'd be talking, I guess, 50 kilo a square metre. I think that's what dense packed cellulose ends up at. So there would be other options, but certainly not without amending and beefing up the structure of the barn, which really wasn't in the sort of scheme of works. Another query was the roof glazing. So the Velux windows, there is a way you can flash them into this type of roof, but that involves certain trim and flashing around the window, putting them in at the same time, and then having an additional sheet above the Velux that's kind of sits down over the top of the flashing. So it's a bit more of a I don't know, I just didn't really like the whole way that was going. It would have forced our hand to get all the Velux in exactly where we wanted it now, and we're just not ready for that decision. Although they're on the plan, we don't have to put them all in, and there is a risk of overheating in some of the rooms. So what we're going to do is go with a different approach where they're cut and flashed in afterwards, which is actually going to work far nicer. We've got a company lined up for that, and they just deal with this style of roof every day. They're all over the country. They are the national specialists, and they just deal with penetrations, whether that's flues or Velux or roof lanterns or anything like that. So what they'll do is, they just said, we need to decide where the Velux goes. We drill a pilot hole, we'll map it out exactly where we go, where we want it. They will cut, they will create the upstand, and then that's fiberglass sort of flashing around it, all colour matched, really quite discreet, and install the Velux onto that. So no additional sheets or flashings or anything like that, just a solid one piece finish, and then we'll finish from the inside, those reveals. So Velux coming, just don't have to, it doesn't have to happen now. We can almost get our walls up, get our external windows in, and then see what the natural light's like. It might be that we don't need it. We do in certain places definitely want the Velux windows, especially in the first floor, in the single story areas. But in those bedrooms where they've got quite a lot of glazing as it is, when you put the thermal modelling through PHPP, it just looks like they're going to get too warm. So we could end up with really small Velux windows, or just none at all, and obviously that's cheaper as well. And it's not the hardest thing to add in the future with this style of roof. We do have flues as well, and soil pipes, which will get the same crew to come in and flash in at the same time, because although some of those we could just do with it like an EPDM collar or something like that and do it ourselves, if they're here and they've got all the kit, we may as well get those big holes in the roof done properly and know that they're guaranteed as well. In a previous video back at the old house, I used this roofing on a workshop, and a lot of people in that video asked, can this be used in domestic situations? I wasn't sure, I didn't have the answer because I never needed to find out, but obviously since then we started the barn conversion, we've looked into it. It was spec'd by the architect and building control were happy, and that's the fact they really liked it. Now people have differing opinions on this style of roof, and sometimes people, you know, talk about the downsides of it being an insulated composite panel, whether that's because of the material it's made from, or people have opinions on fire risk and things like that. But they're probably the same people that end up cutting and fitting the same insulation and stuffing it between all their timber joists and rafters. And I kind of get the feeling that in a domestic situation like this, it's probably okay. You know, it's not like we're in a huge multi-story building where those risks are really ramped up. So I don't have a worry from that. It's not the natural insulation that we're using elsewhere, but in this situation we were forced by planning to not increase the height of the roof too much, and it had to be this profile, so it just made sense to go with this. Now if you've got any more questions, I'll try and answer those down in the comment section below, so just leave them down there and I'll have a trawl through when we put the video live. I hope you've enjoyed this going on. It was a real big moment for the building, and the nets are now down underneath. The scaffolding will soon be gone and we'll be able to get those walls up. Lots to follow. There was a bunch of videos that we've already shot on the block work and all that stuff. We just couldn't do, and I didn't want to post until we finished the roof because it was always going to be in the background. I'll leave it there. Thanks for watching everyone. Remember, if you can, do it yourself, and we'll see you next time.